Hey, today on the Barry Farah Show Culture Shift, we have Jeff Hunt. He's in charge of the Centennial Institute at Colorado Christian University, an articulate, fantastic human being. You're going to enjoy this interview. Welcome to Culture Shift, the Barry Farah Show. We are living in an American culture that has shifted from tolerant to cancel culture, from decent to rude, from optimistic to cynical, and from relatively safe to increasingly violent. But it's not too late. I hope to equip you with a historical framework applied to current events so you can lead and get America back on track for good. Hey, welcome back to the Barry Farah Show, Culture Shift. Joining me today on Culture Shift is Jeff Hunt. He's director of the Centennial Institute. He's sort of famous in Colorado. For those of you who don't know him or about the Centennial Institute, it's connected with Colorado Christian University. It's a really well-respected Christian college located in Lakewood, Colorado. The Centennial Institute's a think tank, and it sponsors research, events, and all kinds of publications to enhance understanding of important freedom-related issues facing our state and nation. Hey, Jeff, thanks so much for joining us today. Sure appreciate you coming on board. Before we dive into how you got here at Centennial, let's just go back in time just a bit. You've got an undergrad from Westmont, no slouch college, and an MDiv from Fuller. My dad went there, and one of the leading MDiv master programs in the world, really. And you attained a master's in political science with an emphasis in political management from George Washington University. Quite the combo of 3 degrees, 2 master's degrees. So just walk us through your thinking. What drove you to have that very interesting combination?
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting because I work at a university now, and I became a conservative because I disagreed with my professors in seminary so much that I ended up researching what it meant to be a conservative, and to understand that you get introduced to William F. Buckley and kind of the general conservative worldview, which was great. But I wanted to be pastor. I was very happy being a pastor. I was on staff at Bel Air Presbyterian Church out in California, and helped build their small group ministry. And so that was my track. But I was introduced to things like liberation theology and the pacifist worldview, and I just disagreed with some of that. And so if you're going to engage with your professor, well, you got to be prepared. And so went out and studied and researched and got ready for my classes, and then started writing the student newspaper. And I said, gosh, I really like this. So 2005 came around, and I'm like, I want to try getting involved in politics. And so knocked doors for Arnold Schwarzenegger's ballot initiatives in 2005.
That's awesome.
So we all start somewhere, right? I'm wandering around Orange County in California, knocking doors for the ballot initiatives. He ended up losing all those. But I said, gosh, I really like this stuff. So I moved to Washington, D.C., and got hooked up with Rick Santorum out there. And worked for him in the Senate Republican Conference. And here I am today.
That's a great story. That's fantastic. Well, it certainly qualifies you for what you're doing now, and you're good at it, in my opinion. You kind of found a way to merge your skills, your interests, your passion with your job, and that's not everyone's story. That is something, though, I really want for every young person I can potentially influence. I'm hoping that it can be very successful, promulgate freedom principles, but then also have for themselves a real clicking where they're merging what they're really good at with what they can make money at. Give us just a little more insight into what it's like to be Jeff Hunt. How do you spend your time in your current job?
Well, I often say I've got a job tailor-made for me because, like you mentioned, I've got a background in divinity, and then background in political management, campaign management. And so how do you move an issue forward? How do you advance the issues that we care about? That's why I got to study in grad school, George Washington, which I really appreciate. So you get to combine all of these. I'm very grateful. Prior to this, I ran an ad agency where we served a lot of candidates running for office. And then this job opened up, and the opportunity to come work with Bill Armstrong is something you don't ever give up. He was a force here in the state of Colorado, and a great opportunity to learn from him. He was a 2-term U.S. Senator, member of Congress, State House, State Senate. He pretty much held just about every job you can in public office here in Colorado. And to be able to learn with him, to be his right-hand person when it comes to public policy development was just terrific. And so, here at the Centennial Institute of Colorado Christian University, we're called by our faith to make a difference in the public square. So we're a very unique university. We have it as a strategic priority. So this is a strategic priority of the university to impact culture and support of traditional family values, the sanctity of life, compassion for the poor, biblical view of human nature, free markets, personal freedom, limited government, the original intent of the Constitution, and Western civilization. So we have a mandate to go out to the public.
Sounds wonderful to me. That used to not be controversial at all when I was growing up. It was just like, hey, that's really good.
Right, exactly. And we have a mandate to go out to the public square and try to make the state of Colorado more pro-life. What a great opportunity to be able to work in a place like this and to be a part of an institution like this that is trying to make a difference, inspired by our faith, inspired by our commitment to conservative principles, and out there trying to make a difference in the public squares is just a wonderful gift.
That's fantastic. You also run the Western Conservative Summit. For those folks that might not have actually participated in that, or maybe they're too young to know that much about it, it's the largest event of its kind in the West. How'd you pull that off? And tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so this was founded, this will be our 12th summit coming up. So 12 years ago, this was founded by Bill Armstrong and John Andrews. And we used to say it was the largest gathering of conservatives outside of Washington, D.C., until a mutual friend of ours created a thing called Turning Point USA, which usurped that title from me. So I tell Charlie this all the time. I go, you took that title from me. We're still the largest gathering in the Western United States. But hey, with what Charlie's doing, we're so proud of his work. I'm glad to give him that title. In fact, I think he's going to give CPAC a run here with maybe possibly the largest gathering of conservatives in the country.
Oh, no, Turning Point's fantastic, and they do great stuff. So your mission really is to foster, I love the 3 F's, faith, family, freedom. In the businesses I ran, we always tried to do 3 things. We ended up coming up with I cubed, invitation, innovation, and integrity. But you get your faith, family, freedom, and it's really to drive toward this exemplary citizen. Can you give us a couple of examples of CCU grads who are exemplary and maybe what they're doing now?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I could give you countless. We're so proud of these students. I got to tell you, Barry, I don't know what you were like in college. I wasn't like these students. I played video games, I skateboarded.
I was perfect. I never do anything wrong.
But these kids, I got to tell you, they're so talented. They're changing the world now. A lot of times people will say we're raising up the next generation of kids that can change the world. No, these kids are changing the world now. Not only are they interning at the White House, they're interning for members of Congress. They're interning at some of the greatest conservative think tanks in the country, groups like the Heritage Foundation, Family Research Council, great organizations. But after that, they have great careers. So the chief of staff to the House Minority Leader is a graduate of Colorado Christian University. The head of the Catholic Conference, who does all the policy work for the bishops here in Colorado, is a Colorado Christian University graduate. So you've got these students that are out there in positions. We're not shy about that. We want Christian conservatives to be in positions of leadership.
Absolutely.
In all different levels of government. They may choose to stay here and lead in Colorado. They may lead their families. Equally as important, raising up the next generation of young conservatives and with their own families, as they may homeschool or work within the home, or move to Washington, D.C. I often tell young people this. This is advice I heard in college. That was probably one of the most practical advice I ever heard. Move to one of 3 cities when you're done with college. Go to L.A., go to New York, or go to DC based upon what you want to do, because you're going to compete at the highest levels, right? You're going to compete with the best people in your field. And when you're done, most people don't live forever in those cities. So they're going to move home. And when you move back, say to Colorado, like I did, you've competed at the highest levels. You
come back at a higher level.
That's exactly right.
Right.
And you take all that experience back. So we encourage our students, go to DC. In fact, we got a student here who wants to meet with me later this week. Who should I talk to? What do I need to do to get plugged in DC? Because they recognize that window of life is actually very small. You can devote 100% to your career before you end up with family and kids and other responsibilities that change your perspective. After about 6 years in DC, I said, I don't want to be working until 8 p.m. every night, missing time with my family. I want to coach my kids' sports. So we moved back here. So take advantage of those few small years that you have.
That's great advice. Of course, New York might not be that big of a deal anymore at the current pace.
I think Florida's giving them a good run.
They really are. Might be a more prestigious thing to be from South Florida. Hey, you've been really at this for a long time relative to your life, and you guys handle all kinds of topics. I mean, you've taken on the most controversial things. Give me maybe one of your more gratifying moments.
Yeah, well, being in Colorado is a little tough right now for being conservative. We're getting things done. But we like to look at ourselves as holistically conservative, right? So you look at Reagan's three-legged stool: strong national defense, strong social conservatism, and strong economic conservatism. So we cannot have limited government without healthy families. I think that makes us unique among the think tanks here in Colorado. We've got great friends who work on the fiscal side of things or the education side of things. But if we're never going to have limited government until you have healthy families. And so
nobody seems to be good at limited government, though. Let's be honest.
Right.
I mean, it's been less limited and more limited. I mean, less huge and more huge, but it doesn't seem like anyone's done that great of a job of actually coming out and leading with a limited government platform. That's got
right. Except for, I would say Tabor is one of the.
Tabor is a godsend for Colorado. And I would say Tabor is what's helped save the current governor's situation and made him look better than maybe he otherwise would look, because it's protected him from a level of overreach in the business community that would be really destructive.
Yeah, and my grandfather's 96 years old, World War II veteran, often said, I've been alive since the Calvin Coolidge administration. Jeff, there's one thing for sure: government will get bigger, which is sad.
True.
I mean, he's
unfortunately.
Which is sad. Yeah, unfortunate, like you mentioned. But as far as victories go and things that we're proud of, so we took nearly 180 students, faculty, and staff to co-lead the National March for Life last year. They selected one university in the country to do this. And I got to tell you, Barry, the excitement among young people towards embracing the sanctity of life and fighting not only for the preborn, but for the mom that are put in these tough situations, the dads put in these tough situations, to care for all of them. This next generation is so pro-life. It's exciting.
Interesting.
We've had that success. We put out a major research paper that looked at the impact of marijuana on this state, because you hear a lot of times, well, we need the tax revenue. Well, what about the social costs? What we found is that for every $1 of tax revenue that comes in, we spend $4.50 mitigating the effects of this. We hired a great.
Well, what about the effect of increasing the average cost of warehousing and distribution space that Denver used to be famous for, making it completely cost prohibitive?
Yeah, you have all these economic side effects that we never explored when we were even thinking about this.
Right.
So there are costs that you need to be aware of. We've been very active at the Capitol. Frank McNulty, the former Speaker of the House, serves as our lobbyist down at the Capitol. And we've, in a time when liberals dominate every aspect of our government, you can still make a difference. You can still mitigate some of the worst effects of that. And that means being at the table.
But you got to be there.
And making a difference down there. So we've made some good inroads at mitigating some of the worst parts of a liberal agenda at the state. And then, of course, bringing in a tremendous amount of speakers over the years, hundreds of speakers to interact with the community, not just our students, which is very important, but the community at large, getting a chance to see these people up close, up front, that oftentimes live and operate in different parts of the country. You get to interact with them right here in Colorado, and it's really put Colorado on a map. So we're proud of all of those successes.
No, that's fantastic. You know, I think we met around 2014, somewhere in there. I don't know if either one of us could have imagined how dramatic the change would be in culture. I mean, just even in the last 12 months, unbelievable. It's kind of hard to know where to start. So many things have changed. You got this current college-aged student that we're both attempting to reach out to, and they've got to grapple with a level of potential persecution for their faith or their conservative political views, and it's intense. Could you give us just a window into how you help equip them for those types of challenges?
One of the things I'm most proud about Colorado Christian University is that we don't shy away from cancel culture or from tough texts or ideas that we don't want to have explored. Our students will read the Communist Manifesto. Not because we want to keep it away from them, but because we know they're going to have to engage with it.
Right.
And so they need to know it. They need to understand it. They need to think through this in a critical way. And so I'm very proud of the fact that oftentimes you're going to receive greater freedom, academic freedom, greater free speech at a place like Colorado Christian University than you would at any other school, like even public schools here in Colorado. They're going to restrict you from exploring texts, maybe even like the Bible, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, it's true. Yeah, it's crazy. So how do the recent challenges differ from what maybe these young people used to grapple with? Just even, let's say, back when maybe just 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think there's a de facto social credit that's being developed right now. We've talked about social credit scores in China, where if you do everything the Chinese government tells you to do, you have a great social credit score, you can get loans, you can get a job,
unbelievable,
you can get a mortgage, that type of thing. But if you go against the government, you can't get those things. I'm starting to see that start to pop up, and there's concerns. I was talking with an author named Rod Dreher recently, heard him talk about this as well. What are young Christian college students going to do when they want to enter the workforce? Are there going to be people that don't like the fact that they're committed Christians? Are they going to face social credit scores, maybe not out in the open, but de facto behind the scenes type of social credits?
That's where some of those executive orders are going. They're laying the foundation for it. You can drive a semi truck through some of those executive orders. We're up to 50 now.
Yeah,
and it's intense. So it's happening, or the potential for it is happening.
Right. I think we're going to really have to look at discrimination against Christians in a way that previous generations haven't seen, and look at the way law would prevent discrimination against Christians in ways we haven't seen. But at the flip side, I got to tell you, we've heard this from a major retailer one time, said we love to hire CCU students.
Of course.
They don't steal.
Yeah, they show up on time and they have a smile on their face and they take care of the customer.
Sometimes they're hard workers, but we're getting to a place where our society has lost that idea of character development,
right?
To where employers are even having a hard time. You know, this as construction employers here in Colorado are having a hard time finding people that aren't on drugs.
Absolutely. With some of the stuff that I've participated in the past, the employees and the hospitality industry were already a challenge, but now with the marijuana break that's required, I mean, they come back to their post, not with everything cranking together, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's a legitimately free break.
Right. All right. These are, it's like coming back to work a few drinks in. These are going to have real consequences. But these are the challenges young people are going to face going out into a workforce. On one hand, they're so much better equipped to deal with the realities of life because they're not into drugs. They're not into
Absolutely.
They want to work hard. They don't steal. But at the same time, you're going to end up with people that are actually anti-Christian bigots that don't want Christians employed. And we've got to balance that.
Man, that is a challenge. But thanks for taking it on. So for our listeners, how does Colorado Christian University ensure that it's going to remain conservative? I mean, those who don't know Bill Armstrong would know that while he was heavily involved, there would be no problem with that. But it seems like universities over time have a liberal drift. So what would you say to the high schooler or to his mom or dad who's thinking about Colorado Christian University as one of their options? Why is it a good choice, and why do you feel like it's safe?
Yeah, well, it gets down to our foundation. And so we have a lot of strategic priorities, but the number one strategic priority is to honor Christ. And Bill Armstrong would often say, if we ever drift from honoring Christ, which is the foundation of what we are, he would even went so far as to say, may God strike down this university.
That sounds like him.
Yeah, the world doesn't need another secular university.
Right.
And so, colleges do change over time, but I think it's our commitment to Christ first and foremost that drives everything else. We're committed to the teachings of the Bible. And our conservative worldview comes out of that. So when you look at the Bible, you see the importance of limited government. The government doesn't solve all of our solutions. It is a responsibility of ourselves to care for our neighbors, to provide a strong, robust civil society and strong families. So I think our conservative worldview comes directly out of our commitment to Jesus Christ and to the Bible. And that's not going anywhere from Colorado Christian University.
That's great. That's fantastic. That's really good to hear. So I've got this little podcast, and I'm attempting to reach the next generation of leaders in basically faith and freedom concept. And in my view, from my perspective, I kind of grew up at this kind of perfect time frame, at least primarily where I was raised. Pasadena, California, many decades ago was actually very conservative, and then Oklahoma. And from there was this connection between freedom and success. And I want this Gen Zer to be group to be successful, but in the context of the whole word of success. And I believe that it's really connected to those freedom principles. You guys have been at it for a long time, which is great. I think when people who don't know you see you in action, they're going to get an idea of why I'm so grateful for what you do. And I really think your calling is really a ministry. We really appreciate that, Jeff. Sincerely, we really do. So I'm going to set you up here. I'm going to fire 3 questions your way, just to let the audience who doesn't know you see how smart you are. I know you could speak for an hour on each of these things, but I'm just going to ask you to give us an abbreviated, pithy argument for just a few of our freedom rights. And the first one's the freedom of religion. Just give us one example that maybe we don't know about, where there's an obstacle to the freedom of religion, and then give us your case for an unqualified freedom of religion and its companion freedom, the free exercise thereof.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, companion, the freedom of thought, freedom of expression are all tied into freedom of religion. And so there's a number of cases out there that we're exploring. One that's going to be upcoming that is a real challenge when it comes to religious freedom is going to be the Equality Act. So this will be introduced very soon in the House. It'll in Washington, D.C., and then we'll head on over to the Senate. But this is what we're trying to figure out right now as a society, right? You've got the LGBT community and the issues that they're of protection that they want to protect with religious freedom. And how do those interact when you may have differences of opinion on those deeply held religious beliefs? We've got to work through this. This is kind of the beauty of America, that we've got to sit down and work through these different beliefs and values. And so that's one thing. We all know the story of Jack Phillips. He's going to be coming out with a book. I had a chance to pre-read the book. He continues to face challenges for his faith as well. So religious freedom is fundamental to this country.
For those of you who don't know Jack Phillips, that maybe haven't heard that story, he's the guy with the cake, and you can explain further what he has had to go through.
Yeah, so Jack Phillips has faced in Colorado really the challenge around a localized version of the Equality Act, which is now going to be tried to be put on the national level. So Jack was a baker, happy to sell anybody anything that walked into his office. He didn't want to use his artistic talents to go against something that was against his deeply held religious values. In this case, happened to be performing a wedding cake for a same-sex marriage. But he also denies Halloween cakes. He denies bachelor party cakes. He denies things that are against his values. And so Jack did a tremendous service, not only for religious freedom, but for free expression and for artists all over this country.
Yes, he did.
By saying that I have the right to be able to choose what I want to be a part of and what I want to use my artistic talents for. Now, if they want a cake, a brownie, if the gay couple that came in wanted a cake or a brownie or any other type of thing, he was happy to sell it to them. He just didn't want to use his talents to create an expression that he was opposed to. That continues to be a case, even though he won his first case at the Supreme Court. He's now been sued 2 other times, once by the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, and then a second time regarding transgenderism. And so these are real challenges. These are playing out in our courts on a regular basis. And we've got to figure out as a society how we live together with our deepest, even when we conflict in our deepest held beliefs. And religious freedom gives us a framework for that. Yes, right? We have differences. I have differences with my Jewish friends, with my Mormon friends, with my Catholic friends, with my Muslim friends. I have disagreements on their worldviews. I have disagreements on how they practice their livelihoods. But in America, we give them the freedom to be able to live out according to their deeply held religious beliefs. And we give them the respect to do that. We, a few years ago at the Western Conservative Summit, signed a declaration of religious freedom for all faiths. So we, as the Centennial Institute of Colorado Christian University, stood with our Muslim brothers, stood with our Jewish brothers and sisters, and stood with our Catholic brothers and sisters, all on the same stage, and signed an agreement saying we're going to respect the rights of each other to practice their faith, even though we may disagree. I'm afraid the left has lost that importance of being able to live together.
It seems like they just want to force you into a certain container.
Right.
And it's connected to free speech, which is the second question. Can you give us one example, just one, of something maybe close to you guys, close to the school, where free speech is being hindered? And what's your argument for it? Why is free speech so important?
Yeah, free speech is critical because, again, it gets back to the idea of freedom of conscience, freedom of thought, and the idea that you can express yourself freely. So you have students all over this country that can't speak freely for their own faith. There's a case right now before the U.S. Supreme Court. Our friends at Alliance Defending Freedom are arguing it with regards to a student at a college that was trying to share his faith. He was only allowed to share his faith within a small location, and he could only do it during certain times. And even when he abided by that rules, he was still shut down by the school administration.
Still harassed.
And so oftentimes I say this, I kind of say it jokingly, but it's not really a joke. We live in a nation where everything else is allowed to be proclaimed and said, with the exception of the teachings of the Bible.
That's right.
For whatever reason,
That's right.
That tends to be shut down more than ever. So the Supreme Court's going to rule in on this with regards to free speech on college campuses. What's allowed, what can't be allowed? Can you restrict people to certain areas? Can you restrict what they say? And this is a real issue for us to work through, especially in cancel culture, because cancel culture is trying to say, unless you agree entirely with me. And we used to push back and say this was puritanical. Now, I think that's a wrong assessment of Puritans.
Right. No, I know what you're saying.
They're very kind and they're very open, but we often used to say that this was kind of a religious puritanical, that you couldn't say things because the church or some type of religious body disagreed with it. Now the government has become the church, and if you say or oppose any of their doctrines, you are canceled. We've seen among young people, unfortunately, these polls that says stuff like hate speech needs to be condemned and prevented. Right. And they won't even define what hate speech is. And so this idea that you may say something that hurts someone's feelings or is violent speech, what is violent speech? Needs to be shut down is deeply concerning with regards to what this country was founded on. This idea, I often feel very like we haven't even gone back and looked at European history. We had all these governments back then that were stifling free speech, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom of conscience, and we created America specifically to get away from that. And now we're here going, you know what's a good idea? Let's go back to, 1700 Europe and develop a government like that. And you go, guys, we created the greatest country in the history of the world, getting away from that, recognizing the unalienable rights to freedom of religion, to freedom of conscience, to freedom of expression. Please hold those as very important to the foundation of this country and to the future of this country. And it gets into a breakdown of civic education, in my opinion.
Yeah, and a inability to handle ideas other than your own. There's a whole social science on that. I got in a little bit of trouble by actually mentioning that in one of our tweets. And there were some liberals that took exception to it. But I was just communicating a social science study, which basically showed that millennials, as a general rule, not every millennial, my millennial kids don't fit into this category, but they have an abhorrence to ideas that are not their own, and they're actually afraid of them.
Right.
And so if you look at who is running those big tech firms. They're all influenced by that concept. And so the whole idea of being thought police, something that we would read 1984, the book, as a way out there. This will never happen. It couldn't be possible. We're adding technology to the socialist Marxist idea. He wrote that in 1949, and what's wild is how prescient he was. And so the thought police now are the big tech firms, and they're run by people who have a difficult time embracing the idea that someone could have an idea different than theirs. And especially if that idea is a Christian idea and a politically conservative idea. And I think part of the reason for that is, Dennis Prager will tell you, give me an hour and a half. You can take 3.5 years with brainwashing those students. Give me an hour and a half uninterrupted and I'll fix them. And the reason is because he's got the right ideas, and the pro-liberty. Let's end on a positive note. We have a lot of trouble out there, but you mentioned that the Gen Zers are more pro-life than we might realize. We've both been engaged in activities that are in opposition to harming the lives of those innocent. We both believe in protecting the lives of the innocent. What's the update on the 18 to 22-year-olds? How many of them believe in the right to life as a fundamental right, and how many don't?
Gallup is showing polling that the younger generations are more pro-life than older generations.
Interesting.
And we see that here.
That's great.
On the campus of Colorado Christian University, for sure. They are happy to embrace the label of being pro-life for a few reasons. One, they've grown up, most importantly, they've grown up seeing their brothers and sisters' picture as a sonogram taped to the refrigerator.
Right. Yep.
Right. So they reject the lie entirely that this was a clump of cells. No.
Right.
This was my brother Barry before Barry came out of the womb.
Right. That's right.
We knew Barry. We were concerned about Barry's health.
That's right.
So that exists prior to.
So thank God for the technology there, because that's awesome.
Science has really helped the pro-life and shown what we know all along, that life begins at conception. So that's one aspect. Science is absolutely on our side. But two, the pro-life movement has changed. We're very proud of our group, CCU for Life, that cares deeply for the moms that are making this heartbreaking decision. They want to care for these moms. And so as the pro-life issue has changed, it's become more holistically pro-life, which I appreciate. Our good friends over at Catholic Charities have basically said, if you walk into Marisol Crisis Pregnancy Center right now, you're 17, 18 years old with a crisis pregnancy, the Catholic Church will take care of you, provide housing, education, food, all the way until your kids are 12 years old.
Wow.
I mean, there's no more excuse to get an abortion.
Wow.
Because
that's impressive.
Groups will take care of you. And so that's where the church needs to be. That's where conservatives need to be. We need to be stepping up in the role that civil society plays. If we want to fight back against big government, we need to demonstrate to generations that civil society can do a better job at caring for people than the government does. And we're not there. This is one of my biggest critiques of civil society. We're not there to demonstrate that we can do a better job caring for people than the government has. We need to step it up in the way we care for people. The nonprofit organizations, the charity groups that we create, they need to step up and show alternative ideas to what the government offers, and we can then move towards limiting government.
No, that's fantastic. Jeff, it's such a privilege and honor to have you with us. Jeff Hunt, director of Centennial Institute. For those of you who want to learn more, we're going to have links to Colorado Christian University and the Centennial Institute and get you connected with them. Thanks again, Jeff. It was a blast to have you with us.
Barry, I'm grateful for you. You're doing a great job here in our state of Colorado. You're becoming a national leader. Let's keep you involved, my friend.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it. God bless you. Have a great rest of the day.
Hi. I'm David Farah. Thank you for listening to my dad's podcast, The Barry Farah Show, Culture Shift. Click subscribe now to be sure you don't miss an episode. Share this podcast with your friends on social media and give The Barry Farah Show your 5-star rating. Check out today's show notes below this episode and at thebarryfarahshow.com. This podcast is also available in video format at The Barry Farah Show on YouTube. See you next time.